Welcome to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show with former NFL QB Matt Simms, Irish Breakdown recruiting analyst Ryan Roberts, and former college long snapper Joe DeLeone.
Welcome back to another episode of the First Team. Joe DeLeone here, joined by former NFL quarterback Matt Simms, also founder of the Simms Complete QB. Matt, today we've got a lot that we're going to be covering. Some coaching movement that happened across the NFL. One head coach that was just hired. We've got an offensive coordinator coming from the college ranks. We're going to react to all of that and more. But the big news, Matt, that I want to get to first to start us off here is the one that just happened right before we were about to record today. Great timing for this headline is Frank Reich, who is the Indianapolis head coach, was fired in the middle of the season after a lack of results early on. The first guy to get hired. The Carolina Panthers are going to be hiring him as their next head coach. First off, right off the bat here, Matt, your thoughts, your reaction. It's so fresh. It's too soon to almost formulate a full thought here, but what do you think of the news? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, I think, big picture wise, this is a pretty good move for the Carolina Panthers. I think overall, Frank Reich is a guy that has been proven in this league, that has been successful. And let's go back through the timeline of just his career in Indianapolis and what he went through. And this is where, when you do a little deep dive and a research into him again, as far as his career and what he accomplished there, it's pretty fascinating when you look back at it. The first thing is that he takes the job in 2018 when Josh McDaniels basically says no to the job after saying yes to the job. And then we hear all the great stories about him and Jim Irsay and
the bathroom thing, which was bizarre.
Yeah, whatever happened in the bathroom, that's a whole nother show that we'll leave to somebody else. But he inherits Andrew Luck, who at the time is going to become, that next great face of the NFL, replacing Peyton Manning and becoming the guy there in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. Have a good first season. They start out rocky, 1-5, but then end up winning 9 of their last 10 games and finish the year 10-6. Unfortunately, though, in the playoffs, they lost in the wild card to Houston 21-7, which I think Houston's quarterback at the time was oh my God, I'm blanking on his name.
Was it Brock Osweiler?
Was it Brock Osweiler or was it oh my God, North Carolina quarterback? Oh my God, he's a great dude too. Dude, I'm so sorry,
Mitch
man.
Trubisky.
No, it's not. Never mind. We'll go back to that later.
Okay.
But nonetheless, a tough wild card loss, 21-7 in his first year, going 10-6 in his opening season, right, as the Colts head coach. So great start to it. Fast forward, right? You go into that 2009 season. Luck is dealing with injuries, doesn't, for whatever reason, seem to be able to get over the hump and get healthy again. He retires prematurely going into the season, now leaving Jacoby Brissett as the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, who they had just gotten from the New England Patriots the year before. And that was the year that they went 7-9. And was the year that, for whatever reason, Adam Vinatieri, who is a Hall of Fame kicker by far, no doubt, had his random struggles with being efficient as a field goal kicker that year. Yeah. When you go back and look at the stats, it's amazing. He was 68% as a field goal kicker that season, which, I'm sure in field goal percentages wise, you're our special teams guy, would be well below the mark for anybody, especially someone of his caliber in resume. So that was a huge loss, a really struggle there with just obviously taking over with Jacoby Brissett, 7-9, still racking up some decent wins with a lot of tough losses with missed opportunities in special teams. Then you get Phillip Rivers for the 1-year deal for $25 million. Phillip Rivers comes in and throws for 4,000 yards, throws for over, I think, 25 touchdowns on the season. And they go to the playoffs again, have another great season again. And their record that season, let me just double check here. Well, their record, nonetheless, I think they had at least 10 wins. They lose in the wild card round again to the Bills, right, 27-24 in a really tough game. Fast forward again, you got Carson Wentz the following year, the heartbreak loss to Jacksonville in the last game of the season when they had a 9-8 record. If they win that game, they go into the playoffs. So we got a guy that, and then, hey, now this season, 2022, I don't even want to consider this maybe like all on Frank Reich. I mean, hey, Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay, they have a say too in the team's failures this past season. But you got 4 years right there. 2 out of the 4 years he's going to the playoffs, and he's inheriting what he thought was one of the greatest young quarterbacks in the future of our game that would have been up there with Mahomes and Burrow and all these guys right now that just unfortunately retires. So it's a really crazy turn of events for Frank in his career, and I think he did a good job of surviving a pretty turbulent time there in Indianapolis.
Right. I look back to, and you pointed out the first key cog here for Frank Reich's career is that Andrew Luck steps away after that first really strong season that they had. And I remember the main headline that a lot of people were talking about is that the future of the league, the future matchup and battle in the AFC was going to be Andrew Luck versus Patrick Mahomes. It was going to be Colts versus Chiefs on a year-to-year basis.
Right.
And we were robbed of that. Andrew Luck, it understandably so, retires because of his own personal issues that he was dealing with. And I don't think anyone faults him for that. But it really impacted Frank Reich's future. And I honestly look at Frank Reich as a guy who has done way more with so little. He has done so much with such little resources and so many challenges. And the biggest challenge of all is one of the zaniest owners in the history of sports, one that I think hasn't really been given the proper coverage a lot more recently for how bit crazy he is with his decision making. And we saw that come to full head where, one, he hired Jeff Saturday out of a broadcasting booth, which didn't really work out. And on top of that, he's still considering Jeff Saturday for the current head coaching position. And on top of that, the weirdest part, hasn't sat in on any of the interviews and still wants to hire Saturday. That's a separate issue. My main takeaway from this, though, Matt, that you talked about here, and I think you illustrated perfectly, the guy is a really underrated coach. And I know that it is a common theme to bring up in these conversations to say, oh, it's another retread. Why are we giving the same guys so many opportunities?
Right.
I think he's an exception. I think it's very similar to Doug Peterson, where there's too much drama to properly succeed with the circumstances that he was dealing with. And for him to now get a fresh start with an organization that he has a connection to as a former player, I think is great. And the big key thing here, I have been saying this I know the cycle is just starting for the NFL draft, but I think that Carolina Panthers opportunity is one of the best openings that are out there. A top 10 pick, an opportunity to start completely fresh with a bunch of really young players. But I think that to not pivot too much to the outlook, I think, and I would say, and it sounds like you agree with me, that this is a really good hire. And anyone who wants to crap on it is more than welcome to, but they got themselves an experienced head coach who was given the short end of the stick year in and year out with so many complications at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's what's so fascinating, I think, about just his track record here recently, that he's had success, even with the fact of the struggles with Carson Wentz. However you inherited Jacoby Brissett and how that took place, his success with Andrew Luck when everything was kind of put into place for it to kind of grow and continue to build, right, year by year. So it really is interesting, his timeline. We forget too that he was a very important part to the Doug Peterson and Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl win. And he was the offensive coordinator of that team, but we all know that Doug Peterson was calling plays. So he had the title, but nonetheless was in the room and was able to be one of the main reasons why they were as explosive as they were offensively with Carson Wentz, with Nick Foles at the starting quarterback position. He's a really good football coach. I think a lot of people will be turned off by this pick just because he's maybe not the most exciting, or young blood, new generation type of guy, but he's been coaching a long time. He's been under the wings of guys like Ken Wisenhunt and Tony Dungy, and he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to at least coach the game extremely well. There has been a little question about his leadership skills and him being more demanding of players, according to Jim Irsay. But hey, time will tell to see how that goes down in Carolina. But you're right, though. I think Carolina is a very sneaky roster that I think even the reason why a guy like Sean Payton was interested in the job as well.
The one thing I will say, one thing that does suck about this circumstance, I'm a tiny bit disappointed that Steve Wilks didn't get more of an opportunity because to
Agreed.
his credit talk about a guy who's done a lot with very little to work with. That's another team that last year was dealing with a lot of drama, especially with the switching around with PJ Walker, with Baker Mayfield, with Sam Darnold.
Right.
For Steve Wilks to do what he did, stepping in as the interim coach, I thought that he had a legitimate shot for that opening. I do believe that somebody like Wilks deserves to be interviewed for other positions, and somewhere down the line, he's going to get that opportunity.
Right.
That's just the one negative of this. I don't see any negatives for Reich, frankly. But I just think that Wilks should get that opportunity, and I think he's proven that he should at some point be an NFL head coach. It's hard to get hired from that interim role because of the circumstance and stepping in after a guy was fired. But again, do you agree with me on that somewhere down the line, Wilks could be an NFL head coach again?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought it up because I was even speaking with my father the other day about it because obviously in our family, all we do is talk about football. But we both were marveling at the fact of just how great of a guy Steve Wilks is, how much of a man's man he is, and what a tremendous job that he did given the circumstances of that football team with the departure of Matt Rule halfway through the year, kicking Robbie Anderson off the team literally mid-game and then trading him off to Arizona like, hey, man, we don't need you, and then ripping off win after win. Meanwhile, Arizona just completely kept falling into the rabbit hole. Exactly. And that was what was so fascinating to me is that he was a guy that said, hey, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to run the show the way that I see fit. He did that, and they were successful late down the stretch. And, one game away from, if they beat Tampa Bay, getting into the playoffs. And that's a credit to him and a credit to his coaching staff and what he was able to do in that short period of time. So absolutely huge credit and respect to Steve Wilks. And yeah, it's an unfortunate part of the business that Frank Reich was able to at least right some of his wrongs from Indianapolis. And hopefully Steve gets that ability too going forward.
Now, the one thing to wrap up this discussion, or at least to pivot it talking about Reich, we both mentioned here that this Panthers roster in this situation, I think, is really sneaky good because you look at what they've done over the past couple of drafts. Like, I give Matt Rule credit. I know that he's not the final decision maker because it's the general manager's role, but he has done a good job of developing and building this roster defensively. I look at guys like Derek Brown and Jeremy Chin who have really come into their own as talented young players, but they lacked so much on the offensive side of the football. That was what led to the lack of success. Now here, after having all these young pieces, you draft Ike Mekwonu last year, who had a strong first season and is only going to improve because he was such a high ceiling prospect coming out of NC State. You're now in a position to possibly draft your quarterback of the future. Or I would argue, Matt, maybe they're a destination for one of these wayward quarterbacks that is looking for a rejuvenation. Maybe this is a Derek Carr spot. Maybe this is an Aaron Rodgers spot. I know that's a little bit of wishful thinking, but if Frank Reich, maybe he doesn't want to repeat the same thing that he had going on in Indianapolis. I just think in general, there are a plethora of different opportunities here and directions that they can go in to start over and possibly win pretty quickly. We saw that they were almost able to win their division with an interim head coach.
Right.
I wonder what the results could be next season with a new regime leading this way.
And I think you're right. I think the ownership and Tepper, they really thought more so just we need to be more proactive with being just better designed offensively. And I think that's why they went with Frank Reich being more of an offensive-minded guy and a former quarterback. I'm very curious to actually know who was in control there in Indianapolis with their quarterback carousel, how much influence Frank had in those decisions. Because, yeah, if he was a part of some of those decisions, yeah, he kind of maybe missed the mark on some of them in the situation. But then again, hey, he hit on Phillip Rivers. They just kind of came up short in the playoffs. But going forward, yeah, that'll be curious to me as well. I see them more so as being a team that's looking to get more of a veteran leader through free agency, maybe drafting a quarterback that they think is a valuable prospect, maybe later rounds that they can grow and mold into a starting position, but getting someone that's a little bit more, NFL ready and can perform day one. And let's not discredit either to the situation of just maybe even potentially bringing back a guy like Sam Darnold and letting Frank and him work together too, because I think Sam really did a good job late in the season. I really did. And I know Sam's not like a top 10 or a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, but he's a good quarterback. He's improved. He's gotten away from his issues in New York. He's in a smaller market in Carolina where I think he can be a little bit more successful, and the lights aren't as bright as a New York quarterback. And as we've seen how tough that can be for him and others like a Zach Wilson. So, yeah, curious to see kind of how this plays out at the quarterback position and what Frank does going forward.
Yeah, a lot of options for Frank, and it's going to be a really fun one. I think that this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for him, and we could see some pretty quick results and a quick turnaround. Now, if we're talking about a situation that it was in dire need of, of a new face, the New England Patriots just hired their new offensive coordinator, and they went with a guy, Bill Belichick went with a guy that he's familiar with by hiring Bill O'Brien, who was the offensive coordinator at Alabama this past season. Now, his results, what he was able to produce at Alabama, it's a bit of a controversial debate on if he was the right guy, if he was actually successful or not. Separate from that, I think, frankly, Matt, that this is a fantastic move. I think that Bill O'Brien is more of a pro offensive coordinator, play caller, coach than he is a college one. He is stepping into a situation where he also gets to work with a quarterback that I think fits the style of quarterback that he's had success with in his NFL career, his college career. This is a fantastic move by the New England Patriots. I know that it seems a little bit vanilla, but we could see some splashy offense in this first year with Bill O'Brien trying to rejuvenate Mac Jones in what's going to be his third season.
The interesting thing, too, is that the Patriots, another team, only one win away from going to the playoffs with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge as their offensive coordinators. To me, that is fascinating. You know, it's just unbelievable the things that they were to be able to accomplish this season with not really having any experience at all at the actual positions that they were holding. So I think that's just a credit to just that entire organization to be able to survive something like that. Now, hey, we all know the frustrations that Mac Jones showed throughout the season, but he's now got a guy that, you're right, is a professional offensive coordinator that knows exactly how to get the most out of pros at this level, and to schematically be able to pick apart defenses while being physical in the run game, while being aggressive throwing the football down the field in the pass game. And you know what? I just remember too, I think it was TJ Yates who started that game for the Houston Texans back in this. That's what it was. I was blanking on TJ Yates because I thought about it. Bill O'Brien had TJ, and he had great success with TJ Yates, and he won a playoff game with him. So yeah, there we go. It came full circle right there. So I'm glad. And sorry, TJ, I forgot you, because TJ, man, you don't deserve that. But Bill O'Brien, Massachusetts guy, he's been a part of the Patriots before. He's had success there before. He's been around the guys and likes of Josh McDaniels, of Tom Brady, of Bill, and he has the experience, and obviously his experience now with Nick Saban. He has the experience now to be one of the reasons why New England takes that next notch up in their league. You got Mac Jones, you got Ramondre Stevenson, who's a great running back. You know, the other question really would be Tyquan Thornton. Can they get him involved in the game a little bit more? He showed flashes a little bit throughout the season with his speed and ability, got banged up throughout the season, but he is talented and he's got some speed. And then you got Jacoby Myers, who did some good things this past year as well. Need to get a little bit more faster and athletic on the outside for them going forward at the receiver position. You have Hunter Henry at the tight end, Jonnu Smith at the tight end position. So there's good pieces for Bill O'Brien to work with going forward here with this New England Patriots offense.
Now, I know that Bill O'Brien just missed Mac Jones by a year when he ended up taking over as Alabama's offensive coordinator. He succeeded Steve Sarkisian. However, we did see, and I know that Alabama didn't win a national championship, Matt. I know that this is, like, again, I mentioned earlier, a controversial topic. If you ask an Alabama fan, they hate Bill O'Brien, which is kind of silly. But the reality of it, he helped Bryce Young win the Heisman.
Right.
He had a lot of really talented and explosive offensive players like Jamison Williams. And then this past year, with the limitations that we saw that they had at receiver, Jermaine Burton was their best guy that they had.
Right.
And there was not a lot of outside speed. There were not a lot of guys that were creating separation or making consistent catches. they still were one of the best teams in the country offensively.
Right.
For them to produce that success with, I think, a very similar mold of roster as the one that we look ahead to with the New England Patriots, one that's got good tight ends, got really good stable of running backs that they like to rotate.
Good offensive line.
Yeah, strong offensive line. I see a lot of parallels, and I think that style of offense, again, is going to work perfectly for the New England Patriots. Alabama fans can complain as much as they want, and I know that Boston fans and fans from Boston have a very high expectation for success early on for any coach, but I would expect boom or bust in this situation. I don't think that there is anything lower than taking a massive step forward with a guy like Bill O'Brien for a lot of things that we said here. We saw the results that he was able to produce as an offensive coordinator, and he's going to get even better now that he's in a situation where there's no limitations. There's no recruiting limitations. They can go draft the guy and fix the problems that they have.
Right. And I think it's interesting too, because the Bill O'Brien situation, I feel like, is more so about just a narrative that he can't shake from Houston. And it's weird because we know Houston is a dysfunctional organization. He left there, but yet still that, incompetence follows him, even though he's actually one of the real reasons why they were a legitimate contender in the AFC South every year. You got rid of him. Now you're not a legitimate contender. You're actually with the worst football team in the NFL, right? Or right there as 1 and 2. So Bill O'Brien is a really good coach. Let's also remember too that he did bring Penn State back to somewhat relevance after post scandal, right? In 2012, I think it was, and brought them to an 8-4 record. So this guy knows how to deal with adversity. He knows how to help build programs and organizations. He is definitely a grown-ass man for sure, and does not take any BS from anybody. And he's a guy, too, that I think will defend Mac Jones and be able to teach him how to be an NFL quarterback and teach him how to play the quarterback position similar to a Tom Brady and what he saw with Tom when he was there, too. All the different things that they could do offensively and intellectually, which I think it will be Mac Jones' strong suit going forward.
Right. I think one thing that really held Mac back this year, he has Josh McDaniels in his first year, and we saw how highly productive he was able to be as a rookie. The positives that he showed in his first season,
right?
He felt directionless this year. He felt like he didn't really have anyone who was in his corner. He didn't feel like he had somebody who was like what you're talking about to help with his development, which is huge. The one thing I will say though, Matt, I just feel like there's this stigma around Bill O'Brien because of how things ended in Houston.
Right.
Him trying to take absolute control over everything, being the general manager. There are very few coaches in the history of the NFL that have done that successfully. So few have been able to do it. And some even question if Bill Belichick can even do it effectively enough as he's done in the past that he can currently do it right now.
Right.
So for him, the way that things ended, I think that everyone just says, oh, look how much of a failure he was in Houston. He wasn't able to produce the results in Houston. It's all his fault. Why would we want a guy who did that? I think that now he can learn from that experience, and we need to move past that. The guy's been successful since. We need to remove that stigma and acknowledge that the guy's, like you just laid out so many good examples. He's a really good freaking coach.
He's a really good coach. He has tons of experience. He's a Massachusetts guy. He graduated from Brown. He's clearly an educated person that actually knows, right, the game of football and really can talk directly to you man to man. And that's really what you need at the NFL level too. That's one of the biggest differences between college and the NFL. College is kind of like, oh, don't worry, we'll do this. We'll get you a tutor. We'll do that. It's like, no, in the NFL, hey, do this or we're going to cut you. It's really simple. And I think that was some of the stuff and the angles that he took in Houston. And it got them to a certain level of success of going to the playoffs and competing in big games in the AFC South. And I think he just kind of, eventually just weathered down the whole community a little bit too much within that building. And there's very few places that can operate that way, like a Bill Belichickian way, right? I mean, where they can handle that type of pressure and just, oh, did I do a good job, coach? Yeah, you did. Do it again. We don't care. We're not going to here to pat you on the back and tell you how great you are. And I think that type of style in certain locations, and especially in Houston, eventually just wears on the entire community And that's where I think that kind of like rubbed the people the wrong way in leadership in Houston eventually. But you can't tell me that he was more successful than any other coach they've had since. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And he was at least a stable, that was someone that was willing to take the fall too for their issues. He wasn't trying to pass it off or say this or that, and that's why I have tremendous respect for him that way too. And I think he's a perfect fit. He's going to do extremely well in New England. Mac Jones is going to be so excited to work with him because this guy has just a menu of just ways to dissect the defense that he probably couldn't even do in college because college kids can't handle that type of detail and that type of assignment, with that style of football at the college level. So that's where I think it's going to be really fascinating going forward.
So let me ask you this before we pivot and talk a little bit about the divisional round that's coming up this weekend. How would you attack trying to improve this Patriots offense right now? Because separate from adding a new offensive coordinator and a guy that has experience calling plays and has worked with a number of successful quarterbacks, if you look at this roster, what can they improve on? You kind of touched on a little bit earlier. What can they improve on? And then how might you approach the offensive scheme too with the way that roster is built?
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick to what I said earlier. I think one of the biggest issues is can they just get a little bit more of a dynamic playmaker on the outside for them? Can they get a little bit more talented at the receiver position, be it through free agency, right? Or just getting someone else, in the draft in the middle rounds where, like we always see these past few years, there's just tons of really good receivers out there. It's like, can they just land one of those guys? Now, in the past, Bill Belichick hasn't been one of those guys that puts a whole lot into that position. Really, I feel like the only time that he ever really showed that was with Deion Branch early on in Tom Brady's career. And then the time that they signed Randy Moss, where Tom Brady broke the single season touchdown record, throwing 55 touchdowns in one season. Other than that, they really haven't gone into that receiver pool, I think, too heavily. But that would be one issue that I would say if the Patriots can just get a solid number one, right, or develop Tyquan Thornton a little bit more, right, alongside with another really good veteran, I think this offense can take the next step for sure. And I think this offense will just be a little bit more well-built, and you'll be able to see just all these other players that we mentioned be more successful, getting Hunter Henry involved, Jonnu Smith involved in the game more, getting back to that two tight end set style of play that made Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, and Aaron Hernandez so successful during those years. So I think there's some great pieces here. If they can just add maybe one or two more to it, this could be a really dangerous offense going forward. And to me, it's like, whose offense do you feel more excited about with the pieces they have? I'm a little more excited about a Bill O'Brien and Mac Jones and the skill group that they have right now with maybe adding one more piece than what like the Buffalo Bills have to do, I feel like, this offseason. The Buffalo Bills, to me, have more problems to solve offensively as a whole. You got Stephon Diggs, great. You got Dawson Knox, great. But where else is the help for Josh Allen? So I think New England might be a little bit closer than Buffalo as far as solidifying that offensive skill position than people think.
Going to be interesting to see how New England progresses, and certainly a positive direction adding Bill O'Brien back into the fold. Matt, I want to talk now about some of the really intriguing headlines that we've got with these quarterbacks that are playing in the divisional round. We've got two guys in particular that weren't high first-round picks. We've got two guys that weren't five-star, high pedigree, highly sought-after prospects coming out of the NFL.
What was Jalen Hurts, though? What was his ranking? Do you know? This is why we need Ryan. Where are you, Ryan?
Ryan would have told us how tall he was in middle school. He would have known that.
Jalen couldn't have been that low of a ranking high school guy. I think he was
a 4-star recruit. I want to check after the show, but I think he was still pretty highly recruited.
I was going to say he was at least a 3 or a 4. Yeah, for sure.
Right. He was highly recruited, but for a guy that had to leave Alabama, go to Oklahoma, and now he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, was in the MVP conversation if it wasn't for an injury. Let's start with talking about Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
For a guy like that and making that transition, fitting perfectly into a new offense after Peterson was gone and then now Sirianni takes over, from your perspective, seeing a guy like that is a a two-dimensional athlete, a dual threat guy that is such a good runner and is used effectively in their run game, but is also a pretty tactile passer when set up in the right situations with good receivers. In your eyes, what do you think makes that just the perfect storm to be what appears to be an unstoppable offense in the NFL right now in the NFC?
Well, first of all, just credit to him for his demeanor, his attitude, his approach, and his overall will to continue to just fight for what he believed, what he thought to be true. And so many of us as athletes, we always do that, right? And more often than not, we don't succeed as much as we want to succeed, right? But credit to him for actually fighting through it and being able to put himself in a position to have this success. And the cool thing about this whole thing is he left Alabama because they're moving forward with Tua. He's going to end up probably being a better pro than Tua Tagovailoa before this is all said and done. With just the situations at right now, it's very hard for me to say otherwise, right? Because like you said, Jalen MVP consideration, the talent that they have on that football team, the way they designed the team specifically for him to be successful. It's very telling too, because this offseason, you saw Nick Sirianni multiple times this offseason, right? What are you going to do about the quarterback position? You stick with Jalen Hurts, blah, blah, blah. And there was this really cool, calm demeanor and answer always, just like, yeah, we're going to stick with Jalen. We like him. We like the things that he does. We like what he brings to the table, his work ethic, all that stuff. And we should have paid attention to those things more because he really was telling us, no, like our team really believes in this guy. We have all the belief in the world and we're going to make it work because we're going to help do it together. And man, we totally dropped the ball on that one because it's been awesome. To go back to your real question though, and I apologize for digressing.
No, those are all great points.
Let's go through just the Eagles, right? Offensive line, we know how great Jason Kelce is. I mean, greatest center, probably one of the greatest centers, all pro centers, in our game, right? That's ever played. Athletically, just the person that he is, right? Mentally, physically, unbelievable football player. Then you got tackles, right? You got Jordan Mailata, right? And you got Lane Johnson, right? Right tackle, left tackle, done, right? Two of the better tackles in the league on one football team right there. All right, now let's go to the skill group. I mean, everyone's talking about, here we go with the Bills situation. Stephon Diggs, good receiver, no doubt, right? Need more depth of receiver for sure. Gabe Davis, Cole Beasley, not getting it done enough in playoff football. But you got A.J. Brown, and then you got Devontae Smith on the exact same team, right? 2,000-yard receivers. Two guys that are just game-breaking talent type of guys that are good route runners and physical and can make catches all over the football field. Quez Watkins, a perfect 3 considering how good the first 2 are, right? A guy that can win a lot versus nickel back situations and find zones and play the extremely well, in tough situations. So another really good, solid football player for the Eagles. And then we got Dallas Goedert, very underrated, undervalued tight end, but dude is a baller. Miles Sanders at running back. Now, Miles and Jalen to me are like the true 1-2 punch at running back. They're the 1-2, running back 1, running back 2. It's Miles and Jalen back there in the backfield. And that's what's so exciting about this football team. The wealth of just skill players, of talent across the board from every position, 11 on 11. It's so exciting. I can't wait to see this game versus San Francisco because it truly is the best 11 on 11 in the NFL. That's why I got so upset when we did the episode about Georgia and TCU, man, because you can't get lucky like that against teams that are this talented and well coached. So that's where I'm just so pumped about it. Jalen's going against the best defense he's seen all year and the most talented and fastest defense that he's seen all year. So we'll see how effective he is running the football.
So, Matt,
sorry, I went on a tangent there, man. I apologize. I got so jacked up.
No, that was all awesome. And it made me start to think about this. And tell me if you don't want to go down this path. However,
okay.
So your brother this week, Chris, stated that he is not as big of a fan of Jalen Hurts as I think you are. I don't know if you know the exact quote that he said, but from what I remember, it was along the lines of that he thinks out of the remaining quarterbacks, he's not one of the best that are on the field that are in this remaining 4 field. Are you higher on Jalen than your brother is, do you think?
I think I'm looking at it more so of the sense of being like a football player and not like what we would traditionally label as like a true quarterback, right? In the sense. Now, yeah, in the remaining four, you're going to put Patrick Mahomes number one on the pedestal, right? He's up there. Like if Patrick Mahomes retired tomorrow, I'm sorry, he's going to the Hall of Fame, guys. Like it's a fact. He's totally changed the game, the way we look at the position as a whole. You know, the things that he's done in this young career are absolutely ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Number two, I mean, Joe Shiesty has done some amazing things lately, and it's really hard to deny what he does, the attitude that he brings to his football team, the moxie, you know, I mean, it's just, he's a culture-changing guy. But, man, I mean, I feel like Jalen Hurts is right there, too. And I think he doesn't get that same amount of credit just because not a lot of us thought that it would turn out this way, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, is a flash in the pan? Doesn't matter. Right. It's working, and they're one game away from going to the Super Bowl.
So the exact quote that I have is that your brother said, again, if you're going to ask me who I'd rather have as a passer, I'd rather have Daniel Jones over Jalen Hurts. Now, that may be slightly out of context, but I'm just not to try to set you through.
He says as a passer, right? And I would probably agree with that to some degree, right? I would. And I think the reason why, too, is that, you know, what the Eagles do offensively is a little bit more of a college type of offense. Spread you out, right? They're getting 5-6 people in between the tackle boxes, running the RPO game. Jalen be effective with his legs, reading the RPOs extremely well, right? Making the right decision, getting the football out of his hands, and then being effective with being a scrambler at times. But I think like as a pure passer, yes, I think Daniel Jones has a slight edge over him. Now, the thing is this, it doesn't matter. Jalen Hurts is going to improve as a passer the more that he continues to play the game. And he naturally will have to improve as a passer because as the years go, he's not going to get faster and more athletic running the football. So him being effective right now with what they do offensively is no fault of his own. He's taking advantage of the offense that they built around him, the playmakers that he has, and he's executing. That's all you need your quarterback to do. Going forward, he will have to improve as a passer more so just because he's not going to get faster and he's not going to get more physical as a runner as his career continues, just like any good running back. You know, no running back has a breakout year, their 10th year in the league. You know, it's typically those first 4 or 5 years, and then they start to downgrade as far as how good and how effective they are in the game, except for maybe like Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry's a different breed.
He's a different dude, yeah.
The last thing I want to get to here, Matt, is talking about Brock Purdy, who has been such an interesting and different headline to follow because he's Mr. Irrelevant. He's the last pick in the draft, and here he is, a part of a team that is competing in the NFC Championship game. Some might argue, and I'll admit I am in the camp that I don't know if he is the full-time, long-term answer. However, he has shown signs of, at the very least, having capabilities as a starter, the ability to start games and win football games because he does not turn the ball over. He doesn't make mistakes. So from your perspective, like, how does a guy like this slip through the cracks? You think at the very least, someone like this who had a good college career, maybe some physical limitations, that has the floor of a really good backup quarterback would be drafted somewhere early on day 3. Instead, he's the last pick in the draft. How do you think a guy like this slips through the cracks during that evaluation process?
Well, I mean, it's not that he slipped through the cracks. He probably got drafted, you know, around the area where he should have been drafted, you know, and the later rounds of the draft with his experience and the stuff that he's done at the college level. But let's just put Brock in another situation. I like Brock a lot. I like what he does. I think he's a good, solid quarterback for sure. But if you put him in other situations throughout the league, right, on other teams, I think some of those issues that evaluators had would have reared their ugly heads a little sooner. You know, his lack of size. He has good mobility, but again, he is behind a really good offensive line in San Francisco. And he's also behind, has one of the greatest coaches and offensive minds in the game, if not the greatest. I mean, it's Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan as 1A, 1B as far as offensive minds in football for my concern, right? With Josh McDaniels probably at 3, and then Mike McDaniel probably like at 4 or 5, right? In his young career, who was a disciple of Kyle. So that's why you see a lot of similarities there. Right. But let's go through the 49ers, just their whole roster again, the same way we did with the Eagles. These quarterbacks are having great success, but again, as everyone always says, right? Oh, this person was extremely successful. Yeah, it takes a village. It takes a village for that one person to have success, right? We always hear that saying as we're kids, right? And the same is true for him right now. Good experience. He throws the ball well, but he's also got Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, right, who is a solid receiver. But Deebo Samuel is a running back / quarterback / tight end / running back / receiver. Like, the dude does everything, right? Brandon Ayuk is a very underrated receiver too. Brandon Ayuk runs fantastic routes, and he is going to get open a lot of times, especially in that offense. Tell that guy, whoever's talking to you, get the heck out of here. Yeah. All right. What's up?
Okay, I got like 1 minute left. Can I just? Yeah.
Tell him.
Man, I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Tell that loser to wait his turn. No, I'm kidding. Okay. It happens.
Sorry, can you pick up right from where you were?
But yeah, so the receiver point, right? You got Deebo, you got Brandon Ayuk, you got Juwan Jennings, 3 solid receivers, right? Then you got George Kittle at tight end, arguably one of the most balanced tight end in the entire position, right? Mm-hmm. Blocks extremely well, runs good routes. The energy, the attitude that he brings, the physicality to the position is unmatched. You got Juszczyk, who is the ultimate Swiss Army knife, does a little bit of everything, catches the football well, is a great blocker, intellectual as well, plays fantastic football. Christian McCaffrey, I mean, enough has to be said. He's a running back, but really he's actually, more importantly for the San Francisco team, a receiver. Right? Elijah Mitchell, who's been running extremely physical late in football games as that 1-2 punch in the backfield. And there's just so many ways that they can get their players back into the game and recreate momentum for their team to win big games.